Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another week of the Wealth Cafe. And we are here for a wonderful coffee conversation with Sheila Storrer. And to give you a little bit more about her, she is a clinical social worker and professional certified coach. She spent the first 20 years of her career supporting adults and families in a variety of settings. And 10 years ago, she realized that she wanted to have more forward-looking conversations and she wanted to focus on what was possible rather than what was not. And so she became a coach, and now she helps people imagine what's possible instead of what's not and take real steps to make it happen. We are going to dive into all of that today. So thank you so much for being here, Sheila. I'm so happy to have you.
Thank you. So nice to be here as well. Happy to have this conversation. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, I think we're going to dive into some really amazing things, especially that the audience is focused on. And so I would love to just start it off with one question. To dive into this, and you talk about looking at what's possible. So we'll just eat the elephant in one bite, right? And
Love it.
how do you help people reframe to what's possible? Because so many people sit in what could have been or what should have been.
Oh my gosh, I love this question. Yes, I think that most humans, we're super good at talking about what we don't want. We can talk about what we don't like, what we don't want, what we don't like about our lives, but we are less able to talk about what we want.
Yeah.
And I think it's a lot of times there's reasons for that. It's scary. It's just not the way that our brains are used to thinking. So what I love to help people do is really, blue sky thinking. Like, what do you like outside of circumstance? What would you love your life to look like? What would you want to be doing? What would you want to be experiencing? And then that's the conversation that I have with my clients. How are we going to get you there? What's in the way? Those things. And it can take a minute because it's a mind shift, right? Because we are used to focusing on everything we don't like.
Yeah. And that's so interesting too. So when I do financial planning with clients, we really focus on, and I make them do an activity that's talk about your dream life. Like, what does that really look like? And they're like, oh, and breaking it down for people, you're right. It's so difficult to sit there and say, okay, what does the future look like? And moving away from the coulda, shoulda, woulda lifespan.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that's so great. And I think it sounds like what you do and what I do is we give people permission to do that, to dream that, to think that, to allow themselves to be able to get what they want and create the life that they want.
It's interesting too that, and I'd love to hear your opinion on this, is the way society has shaped things is that we feel like we need this permission.
Exactly. And I think so much of it is, and I'm curious to see where you think it comes from. I think a lot of it is just like sort of like society or we're supposed to be humble. We're supposed to like, keep it small, keep it tight, don't want too much, don't be greedy, don't, like all those things. So I think we like really often can just cut those desires off and because we think we're not deserving.
It's interesting, yes, society, and then also broken down by generation. Like I think every generation has such a different experience with this, and especially for those that are like the millennial Gen X, I'll even push it into like the baby boomers. It's okay, having more than your parents did already feels like so much. And we're talking about generations that lived through, I mean, this is obviously past the baby boomers, but parents who were raised in the Great Depression, who were hiding money under mattresses, and like you saw that. And so now to sit here where we are, I see some of it, especially when it comes to money. People sit here and are like, well, we've made it so far. Like we shouldn't want anymore. And then they kind of play small in that.
It's funny because I have two sons that are in their early 20s and they travel a ton. My older son can work remote, so he's like all
Mhm.
over the world working remote. And then there's my dad in his 80s who's like very nervous about it. And he's like,
Yeah.
I just don't understand. And why isn't he's saving? And he is saving, but it's like the priorities are different. between those two generations. And so when I talk to my dad, I can feel his worry, and then I can also
Mm.
feel a little bit of envy, like, I would have loved to have done that in my 20s and had those adventures and those experiences. So that is interesting between generations' priorities, right? And
It's
our relationship
interesting.
to money.
Yeah, and it's interesting the envy part, right? Is it's like they don't understand some of it because they're like, how is this possible? How is this allowed? Like all the different things because it was so be in the office by whatever certain time, leave like some of that stigma. So now it's like, well, how do you build that? But then I think there is too some of that envy of like, well, wait, they get to do all of these things and don't have to wait. And I think it's because a lot of those generations as well learned from the ones before of what they didn't want.
Exactly.
And
Yes,
it's
yes, yes,
such a big
yes.
shift. You talk a lot about the uh, different opportunities that we all have, right? And the things that we truly want. How are you helping people navigate what they do want versus what they are told by their parents or their spouses or everyone else of what they should want? And how are you balancing that then with helping them nail down truly what it is and live out that side of their life?
Great question. So a lot of what I do when I start working with someone is, excuse me, what I do a lot with someone when we first start working together is it's so funny because usually a new client will immediately start telling me everything they don't want. And I'm like,
Mhm.
okay, got it. And let's talk about what it is. So we'll start with a very simple exercise, like the blue sky thinking. Where do you see yourself in 5 years outside of circumstance? And what's funny is even sometimes during that conversation, they can be super excited about it, but they'll still kind of fall into but I can't. And I'll be like,
Mhm.
oh, but wait, that's not the conversation. We're blue sky, everything that you want. And so then what we do from there
Mhm.
is that's always what we have our eye on. And so what we do is we build actions and practices to move you forward into that vision. And then what's predictable, right? We sabotage ourselves, we get into our fear, like all those things. So I really help my clients kind of catch that. I'll start with what's predictable. Oh, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to get busy. I'm going to forget. Okay, what kind of structures are you going to put into place to remind you of your vision and keep you moving forward? So it's very um the work that I do, it's not just about creating the vision because we can create all the visions we want, we can create all the awareness we want, but if we don't
Mhm.
have actions and we don't have support structures in place, it's not going to happen.
Right.
So that's a lot of what I do too is like let's get really realistic. What's going to get in the way? You're going to find a million excuses. Um and so it's really building that muscle to continue to move forward. And then also, I think what's really cool about having a coach is that I'm the accountability person,
Yeah.
So when you show up and you haven't done what you've said, it's like, it's totally fine. Like, you don't have to do anything you don't want to do. But then part of my job is to reflect, like, oh, but this is what you said you wanted. Like, what got in the way? So it's a very creating a lot of awareness, creating a lot of realism. And then what are the things that are going to help keep moving you forward?
You mentioned the having a sturdy foundation, right? And there's that quote, I'm absolutely going to butcher it, and it's, we fall to the level of our habits and
Yes,
everything in that world. So I would also love to hear, selfishly, about building in that foundation and how are we focusing on in a world filled with technology, distractions, phones, kids, dogs, iPads, you name it. How do we maintain that foundation, especially when times get tough and there's so many distractions out there?
totally. There's so many distractions. There's so many things pulling at us. There's work, there's family. For some of us, we're caring for aging parents.
Hmm.
There's so much that we are being distracted by. So one way that I like to talk about it is like our setting a sturdy foundation, and it's like I think it's like some people talk about it like the house. As the house grows, your foundation has to grow too, right? So when you're up to bigger and bigger things, your foundation has to get sturdier. And often that's the first thing that goes, right? Because I'm too busy, I can't take care of myself. So actually, maybe I should define foundation. The foundation is our well-being. It's our physical needs, emotional needs, connection, spiritual needs, all those things, making sure that that's tight, that our foundation is sturdy. Sleep, exercise, eat, all the basics, all the stuff we know to do, all the simple stuff we know to do, but we don't do it.
Right. It's the first thing to go.
It's the first thing to go. And it was really funny because before I got on this podcast, a friend of mine was flying back home after being out of town caring for her dad who's in the hospital. And
Mm.
she's really struggling. She's very stressed out. She's very concerned about him. And she said to me, what do I need to do? Like, how can I'm juggling all these things. Like, can you give me some advice? What should I focus on? And I said, really, the only thing that I can tell you is to really focus on your foundation because everything else, what's happening with your dad, what's happening with your family, what's happening for work, like that's going to continue to fluctuate and change. And for you to have the bandwidth to manage it and to show up for the people that you love and care about, you got to take care of yourself first. So that's sturdy. And it's such a simple message, right? But it's the one thing that we can do to make sure that we're able to really show up for all the things that we have to show up for every day and all the people we have to show up for.
It is amazing how many clients I have that are in that sandwich generation, right? They're taking
Yeah,
care of the aging parents, then they're raising young kids or taking care of their spouses, their in-laws, you name it, right? Like they're being pulled in 100 different directions. And the minute, and they tell me all the time, they're like, I need to make space in my life and in my financial life to take care of myself because the minute they fall down, it, exactly the structure you talked about, right? Like it all falls apart because there's so much resting on them.
exactly. And I think a nice way to think about it too is that I think when we talk about well-being and self-care, we often have it like, I have to go to, a yoga retreat or I have to go to a spa day. Like we have it that way where
Mhm.
really that's not it. It's really about maybe it's going to bed 10 minutes earlier. Maybe it's having your meetings end 5 minutes before the hour so you can kind of, breathe a little bit. Maybe it's taking a walk around the block at lunchtime. Like we make it so big that that's often why we just don't do it. I have a client and she was just really struggling in the afternoons. She would get really tired, she'd get really stressed out. And she came up with this like brilliant thing where she would set the timer on her clock for 3 o'clock. And when it was 3 o'clock, she loved stand-up comedy. She would watch 10 minutes of stand-up comedy and then she would go back to work. And just that little shift that made a real difference in the energy in her day so that she could finish work, get home, take care of her kids, make dinner. It was just that 10 minutes of time to herself to let herself kind of get grounded and re-energized.
That is such a good little, I mean, it's 10 minutes, right? We can
It's
all
10 minutes.
find 10 minutes. And how many of us, though, find ourselves because you're not putting it on the calendar, you then find yourselves, I was doing it this morning, right? You're scrolling, you're doing this, that, and the other thing because you need that outlet. And then you look up and you're like, wait, where did the time go? What am I gonna do? And so to have that actually scheduled in there every day as a break for the time when she's at a lull is fantastic. And I'm sure it helps to pick her up then through the rest of the day. She gets everything done and can then go home and be fully present.
Right. And she feels like got her time. So I think that's just like another way that we kind of set ourselves up for failure and sabotage ourselves. It's like what's predictable, we're going to make well-being and self-care this huge monumental thing that we're just not going to do. So it's
Yeah,
like how can you have little micro actions that can really support you?
I love that. And then can we dive into because our lives change, right? If we saw nothing during the pandemic, it was that things can change in an instant. We all have different seasons of life. How do we then balance this during those changing seasons?
I think it's just being really realistic.
Mm,
It's like I think about when my kids were little, I remember one of my things is I would walk my kids to school and I would come back and I would give myself 10 minutes to sit at the table, drink a cup of coffee, and read the paper. And that was like luxurious. And now for me, like I'm an empty nester, right? I have so much more time.
mhm.
So I think it's being realistic of the season that you're in. When you have little kids, you're not going to go on a yoga retreat for a whole weekend, right? And I think it's like when we aren't realistic about where we are, that's when we also set ourselves up for failure. Like if you have high schoolers, you're not going to want to be gone on the weekends. You're going to want to be around to be there. So I think it's just being realistic of your life stage, how you need to be, how you need to show up, and then making your practices and your things work for you and your family and your circumstances.
It's interesting because I see this reflected a lot in people's finances. They will spend so much money thinking they need to like spend money to find this solution. They're like, I just need to buy the Peloton tread, the Peloton bike, and this and have it all at home. And I'm like, you don't need all these things. You need to be honest about where you are right now. Like, and it's back to that moment of like if you have high schoolers and they're playing all these sports, you're not going to want to go for away for a weekend. And then I see somebody, then they'll buy the $3,000 yoga retreat, and then they get upset because then they realize they feel guilty about going, and then they feel guilty about the money. And if we're just being honest about the season we're in, it's hard in the world of social media and everything under the sun. But if we're honest about it, it's going to save financially, emotionally, all of these things. And if we can just be honest and realistic about where we are.
Well, and I love that because I think the one thing that I've found, you know, with my kids is so they're in their early 20s. And when we talk about like family trips and family vacations and stuff, like they just talk about like the simple camping trips. Like they'll remember memories, they'll remember stuff. They're not talking about um even some of the bigger trips we did, like those weren't even their favorite. And I think a lot of times as parents, we have this thing where we have to be creating memories and it's got to be on Instagram and we've got to be like
Mhm.
traveling to Europe and people are taking little kids to Europe, which that's great. And really for our kids, they just want to be with us. They don't care. You don't need to be in Morocco. You can be at the park, and I think sometimes that's where we as parents get our priorities can get a little mixed up is because we really think that we need to make it big and grand and amazing. And our kids don't care. They just want to be with us. They just want to be with us and have us be present and have fun with us.
And I think it goes back to what we were saying before, which is, are we being honest and committed to the things that we want to commit to? And going like with those international trips, like I see so many people that will go on the international trip every year, 2 times a year, whatever it might be, because they feel like they have to do it. And I'm like, well, did you enjoy it? Did you have fun? They're like, absolutely not. It was horrible. And I'm like, okay, what was the, and they're like, but we feel like we have to do it. And I'm like, well, maybe you have to take time off and vacation, but it needs to look like where you are in this moment. So it all falls together. And then they come back and they're like, we need another vacation because we're so exhausted from that vacation. Where can we find money to do that? Like we're gonna cut contributions here. I'm like, what are we doing? And it's honoring that season.
Yes, and I remember when my kids were little being on a vacation and coming home and talking to my brother, and I was like, I'm just so exhausted from that vacation. He's like, oh no, that wasn't a vacation, that was a family trip. He said it's not a vacation until your kids are older. And so I remember when he said that to me, it was the first time I'd ever really thought about it that way. I'm like, oh, that's a really nice reframe, of setting expectations depending on stage of your kids, right?
Right. And then that brings into like a lot of people who especially are in listening to this that are in their, I'll say like in 30s into 40s that have every weekend something, right? And even to your 50s, right? It never ends of we have this birthday party and then we have that and then we have this family obligation. And it feels like you're never, to me, it feels like it's never ending, right? Because you're like, I need a weekend from my weekend because I just spent my weekend checking off all these things for everyone else. But having those like 10-minute little increments that you talked about that you're building in, I think changes everything. And I will be taking that away from this. So if anyone catches me at 3 o'clock watching Ellen or whoever else is out there now from comedy, she's not even on anymore. But whatever it is, I think it's a great solution.
Definitely. It's a good one.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Okay.
So, can you also talk about for those that are in this sandwich generation, they're balancing a lot of different things. How do we communicate with different people in our lives what we have committed to?
I would say a place to start is like with yourself.
Mm.
What Before you can communicate to others, I think it's really a conversation with yourself about what's important to you and what the priorities are. And I think where it gets tricky is when you have kids at home and you have parents and every aging parents and everybody's pulling on you. It's really getting clear with yourself on what you're committed to, how you want to manage it, and then it's really boundaries. It's really being able to set boundaries with everybody in your life. And maybe it's, you can show up for your aging parents in one way, but you need to maybe hire help to do something else. Maybe it's you are going to have to, figure out with your family, like if you have kids, partner, where you are going to have to set some boundaries there so you can show up over for your parents. It's such a juggling act, but I think it's getting clear with yourself, creating boundaries, and really just managing guilt because you can't do it all. And it's always going to kind of be changing and just giving yourself a lot of grace.
And I think that's important too, is getting clear on what is it you actually want to do, because I know, and I've seen it especially with clients who are like, yeah, my parents moved in with me, so I therefore feel like I need to take care of them all the time. And I'm like, well, is it better than to hire help if that's a financial possibility or something you plan for? So then that way you can actually spend those moments with them versus it being this like, well, now we're doing, a bath routine. Now we're doing, toileting, which is really hard to be a caretaker, right? Or is it that you want to be able to, sit there and like play a game with them, to have like eat a meal with them and those moments. And so I love that you're talking about being clear with yourself, because then that way you can sit there and say, what is it that I actually want to do? And what can we then outsource so we can actually be with one another in the way we want to show up?
That's great. I think as you were talking, I thought of another, I think, really important thing. It's like
Yeah,
remembering
please.
your role.
Mm,
Like, are you um when you were talking about having a parent move in with you, that is like the most generous, loving thing. And I
yeah.
think the thing like in that situation is like, when do you get to be a daughter?
Mm,
Like for me, it would be when if I had a parent living with me, are you always in the caretaking role? And maybe that's not your strength. Maybe it's hiring someone to do that so you can be in the daughter role and like provide love and support and have that relationship. So always kind of thinking about what hat do I have on and what hat do I want to have on?
yeah.
Do I Am I caretaker now? Am I daughter, child? Am I like, who do I want to be? What's best for my parents and the relationship? Because I think it gets confusing and then we can just heap tons of guilt. And maybe it's like you're not meant to be the caregiver. Maybe you're meant to just be the daughter and love or the child.
That
If
is,
that makes sense.
no, it absolutely makes sense because, and I think especially as women, we assume on and take on so many different roles and hats because we think we have to, rather than what we want to versus what we've communicated we want to and have agreed to. And, that could be an endless rabbit hole, but how are we also then making space to still be the daughter rather than the full-time caretaker? Or how do we still get to be the mom versus just the Uber driver and actually enjoying those moments? Because we then find ourselves, and I don't know if you see this with your clients, but I catch myself sometimes being like, you're just trying to get through and then survive it, that you're wishing the moment away. And it takes away a lot of the being present.
Exactly. It makes me think of when my kids were teenagers, I had to constantly remind myself what I was committed to, and what I was most committed to was my relationship with my sons. And so when I
Oh,
found myself in the naggy, your homework and you were late to school, and when I found myself in that, I would have to think, this really got me through the teenage years. I would think, what am I most committed to? It's having a relationship with my children. So I'm going to let their teachers get on them about their homework. I'm going to let the attendance lady get on my son because he's late every single day, right? Like I'm most committed to the relationship. And that would help me get out of the micromanaging, naggy kind of thing. And I think that we do that with our aging parents too. Like I can go full on into it with my dad. Like you didn't do this, you took too much of this. Like what are you doing? And then I have
Yeah.
to remind myself like I'm most committed to having a relationship with my dad. So maybe I need to shut up and just, I mean, within reason, right? But like maybe I
Mhm.
need to let his doctor handle this, or, you know, maybe it's not that important and I can just let it go.
It's so true because then it gets in the way of everything else. And you never want those to be the memories and the moments that you have or that they have. And then it can be just an endless cycle.
Exactly.
We unpacked so much great stuff today. So thank you so much for being here.
You're
I
welcome.
like to end with one final question for everyone. And that is, what is one thing you do every day that makes you feel wealthy?
Oh, wow. What a great question. Okay, I need to think about this for a second.
This is why I like to surprise people with it.
I know this is such a surprise. Okay, I'm just going to tell you the very first thing that comes to mind, and it's
That's what we want.
kind of stupid. Every morning, I take my thermos. I have a big water thermos, and I love tea. So I have all these exotic teas. And so while I'm making coffee, I also make my tea for the day so that it's ready and it's here. And it feels wealthy because it's always friends give me tea. I collect
Mm,
teas from different travels and stuff. So yes, it makes me feel wealthy.
that is beautiful. I love it. I love it. Well, thank you so much for being
You're
here, Sheila.
welcome.
If anybody wants to connect with you, ask you some questions, where can they best find you?
Oh, I would love to hear from your listeners. They can find me on Instagram at Sheila Storrer, and also let's see where else, LinkedIn, and always happy to have someone shoot me an email. Love to chat.
Awesome. And we'll make sure all of your contact info is linked in the
Thank
show
you.
notes so you have it. And thank you everyone for tuning in to the Wealth Cafe. And we will see you again next week.